Hi, and welcome back, Flipsiders, to another episode of The Flip Side. Here today, we're going to be continuing our series talking about just some of the various fun philosophical object lessons and truths that we've kind of come up with over the years since enjoying those times together. And today, today's message is basically entitled "Life is a Game of Knockout." So, Andy, tell me what is it? What do we mean when we say life is a game of knockout for our viewers?
Well, I find it that these truths are self-evident, right? But in case you don't know what the game of knockout is, the game of knockout is you stand at the free throw line at a basketball court, right? And there's a whole line of people, and two people, the first person shoots the ball. If he makes it or she makes it, then they go to the back of the line. They're in for another round, right? If they miss, the person behind them makes the basket before they do. Well, then they're out, right? So just a cutthroat game, and you keep playing the game until there's one person left, right? And so that's the concept, right? And we are challenged to think that way about our Christianity, right? Paul says that we need to run the race in such a way as to win. Don't you know that people who run a race, they want to win, right? So knockout is this super intense competitive thing that, by the way, anybody can play, right? So we've watched people who are super duper good at basketball. Sometimes they get knocked out first, right? Because it has a lot more to do with just the way the ball bounces, the way things are in that moment, what happens with the person ahead of you, all of these kind of things.
Yeah, and also, too, with the game of the knockout game concept is that we like you just described for us this idea of good competition, this idea of compete to win the prize. This that Paul talks about, or I don't beat the air. I don't train my body aimlessly, and so forth. And that's referring to this idea of spiritual discipline, essentially. And then but then we think about the sort of the negative side of competition. We think about, for example, in American society, we are a very competitive society. And I think one of the areas that this really rises to the surface is social media.
Yep.
In social media, you have this rat race and which is ironic because you're probably watching this on social media right now. But we have this rat race of trying to one up the next person, taking the perfect picture of your house, taking the perfect picture of I always laugh when I think about the family on the holidays where they get the picture where everything looks perfect and everyone's having a great time, and then the reality is there's all this craziness going on and perhaps some family drama, and it's anything but what the picture actually shows. Or someone puts a picture of their brand new car on there and it creates this sort of a look at me moment. I think back in the day they used to refer to it as competing with the Joneses or something like that. And when we think about competition, competition can be a beautiful thing and it can be a terrible thing. It all comes down to why. We both love sports. We were just talking to a good friend today, a good friend Chad today, right? A former Flipsider, about some sports stuff. And sports can be a beautiful thing where it develops character and it builds teamwork and all this stuff. But then it also, we talked about how back in the day people were more focused on the team, but whereas today it seems like people are more focused on money versus perhaps being loyal to their team, or and so forth. So when we start to think about competition in a negative way, it comes down to really knocking the person out, but not giving them a chance to get back in the game again.
Yeah, well, I love the game of knockout because it puts everybody on an even playing field, actually, right? Everybody has a chance to stay in the game. If you make your free throw, you stay in the game, period, right? If you make it when it's your turn, you stay in the game. The problem is that if you don't make it, right? If you don't do what you're supposed to do, if you're not running the race right and well, then you're going to get off track, and then you're making up, right? Then the person behind you, if they make their shot, well, you get knocked out, right? And again, they're so relevant to the Christian life that while we're all competing together, really, the truth is that we're only competing against one another when we get off track, right? So if we're on track, really, truly, a game of knockout could go on forever with everybody in the game if everybody just makes their shot. all the time, right? Now, again, we're liking it to the fact that we know that's not going to happen.
Yeah, we're
right?
human.
People aren't always going to make their shot. Now, what happens though is in the game of knockout, like when you don't make your shot, what happens with the ball? How badly did you miss, right? The bad early you miss, right? The more badly you miss,
Yeah.
right? Then the more off the ball goes, and then you're in trouble, right? Because all the person behind you has to do is just make their shot, and now you're off chasing a ball somewhere, right? It's what the enemy wants us to do. He wants us to be off chasing a ball somewhere, so instead of in the game. Right, the enemy of our soul is constantly attempting to get us off track, get us off chasing things that we shouldn't be chasing. Right, and one of those is in the area of just how we interact with each other. Right, so I think you have some verses that are really good for that.
Well, and that's the thing, because when you're playing knockout, one of the things I love about it was always the encouragement. Everyone's kind of like when people get out, they're cheering for each other, cheering for the people still in.
Yeah, or against.
And there's also the excitement of the get back up again factor, because when the game's over and you get to celebrate someone's victory, then you all get a chance to jump back into that game again.
That's right. Get going again.
And that's a beautiful thing. But sometimes, and I think we've, I know, like when that competitive spirit maybe gets a little too intense, you start to find things like this, where we look in Galatians 5:13, it says, "You, my brothers, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the sinful nature, rather than serve one another in love. The entire love is summed up in a single command: love your neighbor as yourself. Yeah. If you keep on biting and devouring each other, watch out, or you'll be destroyed by each other," and so forth. And and when we read that, like this idea of biting and devouring each other, we could talk forever about how Paul addressed a number of conflicts between people in the early church throughout his letters. But it's this idea of essentially just like attacking someone or letting that competitive spirit become a bad thing. Instead of celebrating someone else's victory, instead we turn it into feeling sorry for ourselves. Like in knockout, you could feel sorry for yourself while you're sitting on the sideline. Hey, I missed that shot, I made a mistake, the regret, the fill in the blank. But instead, you could celebrate that person and then down the road get back in the game again.
Yeah, well, the problem is we start looking at each other's shots. Like, that's the problem. Rather than focusing on my shot and paying attention to me and the fact that I'm not going to do it perfectly, so eventually I am going to miss too, right? Even if I make it 10, 20, 30 times in a row, eventually I'm going to miss a shot, either on my own or because somebody's going to walk up behind me at some point and go, "Wah," while I'm shooting, right? And I'm going to miss it. Like, that's what's going to happen. But what happens is, too often, we just turn into commentators of what everybody else is doing, right? So even if we're in the game, even if we're shooting, right, we start commentating on how badly other people are shooting, right? How badly they missed, right? And the other side of that is, the flip side of that would be, we start comparing what we're doing to other people as well. Some of biting and devouring is because I start comparing my shot to yours, and I know it's not as good, so I start finding fault in yours, right? Or I start looking at the little rules, like how close were you to the free throw line? Did you step over it? What did you do? Like, you must be cheating, Dave, in order to beat me, right? The truth is, I just need to work on my shot, right? If you want to play a game of knockout well and right, you better start shooting some free throws. And then you might want to practice some layups, because if you miss the free throw, then you get an easier shot, but you have to be able to make those shots as well. We've seen some pretty good basketball players miss.
Yes.
Miss easy layups, right? Because they're so worried about other stuff.
And that's the funniest thing is when people hit the big shot, but then they miss the little layup, So with that being said, when life knocks you out of the game, right, the key is to, on the sideline, celebrate other people's victories.
Amen.
Realizing that God will give you a chance to get back in the game again soon. But the key is this, if you're not in the game, then you're never going to get to experience either the thrills of victory or the humbling moments where, where things didn't go so well, where you missed the shot, maybe that defeated moment that God wants to redeem and use that story to encourage someone else. So thanks for joining us. We hope to see you guys again next week here at The Flip Side.